Jacob, you wore many hats on the film Manchester by the Sea: sound editor, sound designer, re-recording mixer. On a film like Manchester by the Sea, I think it's easy to overlook the intricacies of the sound that go into it because it's not as action heavy or
Right.
explosion. But what are some of the challenges of the job on a film like this?
Well, the challenges on a film like this are, yes, the subtlety and the decisions made as to what to hear when, um, and when is it too much, and when is it not enough, when is it not enough, and when is it just right. And so that's where working along with Kenny on all of that, he was so sure of when it was too much, when it was not enough, and when it was just right. And I could cite many examples. For example, the opening of the film, where we open with music only, and then we slowly kind of melt into the sound of the uncle and the nephew on the boat just joking around and talking. And that's where, as a sound designer, I came to the table there with all your full complement of, surround environment, wind, seagulls, hearing water lapping on the boat, something to sweeten and augment the engine sound of the boat, all of that stuff. And Kenny said, no, let's just keep it really simple as we ease into this conversation. And we played a lot with fading into the conversation. And we even, as we were mixing, swapped out specific lines as that conversation, was starting. We played around with different lines and what they should be saying and how we should ease into it. So, and then as we join them on the boat and there's no more music and it's just us on the boat, we brought in some of the other sounds, the boat sounds, environment, but at a very subtle level. And I would say that process typified the entire process for the movie of having everything to choose from. My job being with Kenny to give him all of the options of what one might hear in any given environment: dogs barking if it's residential, coloring the winds, adding tones to the winds where that could add something. And then him deciding, he told me many a time, okay, wait a minute, too many dogs barking. We don't want to hear dogs in every scene. We don't hear. But then all of a sudden deciding, wait a second, this is a scene where it would be great to hear dogs, and we're going to hear them. And then it was a matter of, well, when, how many, when do we hear them, when do we not hear them? And these are things that played out over time. So we start the process with a spotting session before me and my team do any work at all. I go in there with Jen, the picture editor, Kenny, and we sit down, we watch the film, we talk about every scene. And that's a key part of the process for me, because I want to know, almost as an actor would say, what's my motivation in reading a script and starting to think about how they're going to put together a role. I do the same thing as a sound designer. I'm thinking, how do you want to tell your story and where do you want to go? There are endless possibilities with sound, and you could go way over the top, or you could be very restrained, or you could be very abstract and impressionistic, or you could be very literal. And where do you want to go? And you start to get a sense of who the director is and what kind of aesthetic they carry with them. So I would say, Kenny was definitely more of a kind of reality type person. But then you start to find out that every director that wants real life, that wants things to sound authentic, has a very specific idea of what real life is, So an example of that might be when they're playing ping pong. I had a particular sound in for the rackets and the ball hitting the racket in the table. And I had maybe 5 different recordings to choose from. And I chose the one which I was familiar with from my life of hearing people play ping pong. And what seemed to work in the scene to me. So I went with that one. But when I played it for Kenny, he said, wait a second, that's not what a ping pong ball sounds like on a racket. I said, okay. All right, well, I have some other possibilities. And he chose another one that for him, was the sound he'd been hearing all his life for what a ping pong ball and a racket sounds like. So that's our whole process in sound. It's really so subjective. And what might work for one person, or what might even work for me, might not really be what the director has in mind. It's really my job to come in line with, to really get a feel for the director's aesthetic, and then, live in that world and just be immersed in that world and know that world. And so I got some of that in the spotting session, but a lot of it also didn't come until we were actually mixing too, as well. A lot of people, sound is a bit hard to talk about. So sometimes you need to create and do design and put a scene together, put it in front of a director, for them to then react and say, no, I don't want this, or this is not the way I think it should sound. And then you're able to really get somewhere.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you brought up earlier in creating the sounds of the boat and the seagulls, one of the great qualities of this movie is that it has a great sense of place.
Mm.
You really feel immersed in this Upper East Coast town, this fishing town. Talk a little bit more about your role in helping create that atmosphere.
Well, one of the first, when I saw Kenny after a screening, before we started doing any work, the very first thing he said to me was, you have to definitely go up to that area and record sound. And he said, I want to get as much of the local accent from, that New England accent. I want to get as much of that as possible into the movie. But he also said, I want just ambience, waves, the boat sounds, wind. And so we put together, I took a trip up there right around this time last year, or right before Thanksgiving. It was a great trip, and went to the hospital, went to the hockey rink, went to Pratty's, the fisherman's bar, went to the high school, went to all the places that are in the movie and recorded voices. Had, kids in the high school walking past my microphone, just talking and recording that. Did the same thing in the hospital with some doctors. Did the same thing in the bar, and the bar would just let people know, hey, we're doing this, and let them, drink and have fun and just get rowdy and record that stuff. So that a lot of that stuff made it into the movie. But when you see the movie, you'll see that all the sound operates, with maybe a few exceptions, like in the hockey scene where it gets very loud. A lot of that sound is just, it's operating on a very subtle level, yet it is there. So I think in terms of creating a sense of place, it was very important for us to put the characters in the movie in that place, and to really, if you were able to really feel that place and feel that part of the country, then we succeeded in what we were trying to do, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think one of the other important aspects of your job is sometimes deciding what not to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you miss certain things, or to create a certain sense of mystery around something. Can you talk a little bit about that as it pertains to this film?
Yeah, that's a big part of this film, because there are many instances in which we don't hear anything, or we hear only music. So the whole middle fire section of the movie is an example of that, and that's where we are going in and out of all different permutations of hearing music along with the environment. And sometimes pre-lapping, so we're cutting. Casey's character Lee is sitting in a lawyer's office, and he begins to remember what happened. And as he remembers what happened, the sounds of what happened are sometimes encroaching into the shots of him sitting there in the office, and sometimes not. And that was something that that was largely mapped out by Kenny and Jen in their cutting room, cutting the picture. But when we brought it into mix, we kind of made changes to that. So we would blur some of the lines, or switch and change some of the places where we went in and out. There's parts of the fire scene where you see firemen going through, picking through some rubble. And we had done Foley for the sound of that rubble. And we had for a long time while we were mixing, as a way of getting in and out of reality and bookending a section that only has music, you would hear just the sounds of the rubble. And then I think for the film in the end, we pulled that out. So it was a matter, I think it was something that Kenny always felt very strongly about and had a sure sense of when it was working to hear the natural sound, and when we had montages of going through the town, seeing shots of Lee's character. He's looking for a job at one point in the movie, and you see him going to a mechanic shop and going around town, and we don't have the sounds of that, but we played with having the sounds of that. We put that in and then watched it and then took it out. So in every instance where you don't hear sound, we probably tried it with sound as well. And then there's a rhythm, and the movie has a rhythm and a life of its own. And in a sense, even beyond Kenny, or as an extension of Kenny, the movie makes the decisions for itself. And you begin to see where you throw something into the movie and it rejects it. So the movie has its own kind of its own personality, and it's actually gets to a point where if you threw a sound in, the movie would reject it. You would know, anyone would know, wait a second, that doesn't belong there. So that's how that worked.
Mm-hmm. You bring up that scene in the lawyer's office, and the sounds of the past kind of encroaching on the present, and this movie unfolds very much like a novel, in that scenes from the past help give us an idea of how they affected the present. And I wonder if there were any more of those little subtle sound cues that you might have used to differentiate between the past and the present, or without making them very obvious that we were going to a flashback all of a sudden.
Right. And there's nothing, actually, it's a great question, because I was thinking about that watching the movie last night at the premiere. And it just struck me how we never put some little hint of a sound. We didn't use a device sonically to tell the viewer this is a flashback. We didn't do that. And there's no rule of thumb. I think some of the flashbacks maybe play out silently, but then other ones play out as pure reality. And there are many times that we just cut from reality in the present to reality in the past. And, it's not like we used tricks like using reverb or, things like that, which have been used in other movies going back in time. We didn't do that, and apparently we didn't need to do that. The movie works, you don't have to do it. There's no question sitting and watching the movie after not having seen it for so long, that it always worked. You always knew, because of the way the movie is cut and the way that it's shaped, you always knew, and the way the story is being told. It's just like in a novel, like you said. In a novel, it's just laid out that way, and that you're going to the past, and you let the viewer fill that in. Maybe the viewer fills in something different about the past. But it's not as if, to my knowledge, those scenes were shot. It's not like they were sepia toned, or there was nothing that was done in the way that they're shot as well to say this is different. We're going to make these look different. As far as I know, maybe something subtle that I don't know about.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to your editor Jen the other day, and it is a credit to your work and her work and Kenneth's work that you're able to tell where you are in time and what's going on in the story without any of those very obvious dissolves or color tone changes or reverbs or things like that. It's just very apparent in the story. So lastly, I wanted to ask you, we're an awards website, and you've won an Emmy for your work on the war, the Ken Burns documentary, and you've worked with him a lot and been nominated for several Emmys for his work. This year you're in the Oscar race with Manchester by the Sea, so I'm just curious what that kind of recognition means for you in your career.
I think what it means is simply it's simply that people are noticing through the projects themselves. You generally get that kind of recognition when the project itself has a certain degree of profile. And for the project itself to have a certain degree of profile, there are forces that just have to come together. So I've worked on amazing movies that have had no profile. The most recent being The Light Between Oceans, which just came out. It's an incredibly moving film with an incredible track, some of my proudest work in terms of sound. And I don't think it's going to get the same treatment that Manchester by the Sea is getting, simply because of the forces behind what promotes a movie and what doesn't. So but what it means to me is that it's nice for people to be able to say, oh, we notice what you do. And there are many other people besides me who may not be getting the recognition at a point in time. But it's some people saying, we notice what you do. We are going to stop and think about it for a second. We might interview you. And I kind of, these interviews is a chance for me to talk about, it's to put a face and a mind and an actual person talking behind the work and say, because for each one of us in all the departments, we have given our lives over to what we do. Our families are sucked in, everything gets sucked in. It's this total devotion to the craft. It is nice to get the recognition, but whether the recognition comes or not, it's not going to change the way in which I go about doing my work on each project that comes in. And, all the things about trying to help someone tell their story and to do that in sound, and all the things that I love about doing that, that I enjoy in doing that, will not change. But it is nice, and hopefully it helps me, one would hope that it helps you to get projects that you like doing, projects that interest you, that are interesting. I think that's the best thing that could probably come out of recognition is future projects and being able to kind of help for, we can't always control our careers, but if that helps us to control, and, if it helps us to be able to say, oh, there's a project, I want to work on that, I'm going to approach the director and the producers, and now I have a chance to be hired, hopefully that helps me more in getting hired for that job, So that's what hopefully the recognition would bring, hopefully.
Absolutely. Well, Jacob, congratulations on all your work this year, and thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Likewise. Great talking to you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you. Bye.